Today we have Bayron Alvarez. He recently completed a massive point-to-point challenge that he's going to speak to you a little bit more about. I'm excited to get into it and kind of apply sports psychology to what you did. To begin, hit us with a brief version of what this challenge demanded.
The premise behind it was to bike pack around 1,400 miles from one point to another point, specifically starting in Puerto Montt in Chile and ending in Punta Arenas in Chile. Within that distance, I ended up having to do 2 border crossings. It was all performed solo, self-sustained for the most part, up until there were the issues that arose, which we'll get into later. Mostly all along the Carretera Austral. 65% of it was done on gravel. A lot of it was pretty gnarly. Some single track and most of it was paved. The elevation gain was around 80,000 feet, close to 3 times the elevation of Mount Everest. And I always bring that up because it's kind of hard to picture how high that is. I believe a commercial plane flies at around 40,000 feet. So that's another good perspective. And it really demanded a lot of mental endurance, a lot of mental toughness and physical resilience and self-reliance. So it was quite the trip. Definitely wasn't prepared going into it, but we did it. So super stoked to be here.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you weren't prepared and you did it.
Yeah.
That's something in psychology we love to do. If you were to think back on this journey right now, what's the brightest moment that comes to mind for you?
There's not a single moment I can think about, and it's all very blurry at this point. The one thing I can think of is like arriving to my final destination at the end of every day and having the sense of peace and safety that I made it to wherever I needed to get to, knowing that I was able to get water and food. Those little things really brought me a lot of happiness. I think those were the brightest moments. Actually, starting to think of it now, there was a point where I was in Puerto Tranquilo, where I left after getting my bike fixed the final time. It was a long day. It was like 95 miles, and I was making it to Cocarén, which is another big city. I got to see the environment change in a drastic manner that I don't think I've ever been able to really. It's incredible. Like I went from a temperate forest into a desert, into a steppe, and I saw this river running along the entire road for almost 50 miles, and it was just this dark blue turquoise color, and the way the light reflected off of everything made it feel like I was on a different planet. That was definitely an insane experience, but it's almost like it doesn't bring happiness, but you're just in awe, because you're exhausted. You almost don't have the energy to feel emotion, but you're just taking it all in, and you're looking at it like, wow, just in shock. But
Sounds like you did it right.
Yeah.
And if you think back at that serene moment, can you hear the sounds that came with it?
all I heard was wind, man. It was just headwinds. Yeah, like that you're not hearing much but the winds, but every now and then you would hear there were these birds, dude, that were so annoying. They sounded like just sirens, and they would keep me up at night, and they would be up in the day, and you just hear them, and I began to kind of create this relationship with these birds where whenever I would hear them, it would just piss me off, but you would hear those birds, you would hear the water running every now and then. You're so high up, sometimes you don't really hear it. But most of it was just wind, man. It was pretty windy.
Yeah. It looked it in the vids for sure.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you did to mentally prepare for this challenge? And if not, this is not a problem, but I'm just curious.
My background, more recently, as of the last 2 years, has been triathlon. For the past 2 years, I've been training twice a day for anywhere between 3 to 4 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. So I thought the mental readiness I had from that alone was going to be sufficient for the 8 to 12 hour long bike rides, sometimes reaching 14 hours, 15 hours, right? But no, it wasn't. Because one thing is to bring the body and the mind to failure over the course of an hour or two, even within a race. But you still have the comfort of food readily available, whatever you want to eat, whatever you want to drink. If you want to stop, you can stop. If you get hurt, there's help. Not having those mental luxuries and prolonging the the exposure to the elements and to physical and mental fatigue over 8 to 12 hours every day I wasn't ready for it. I don't think anyone can be ready for it. I don't think there's any way to prepare for it. It was
Other than doing it, right?
other than doing it, and the next time, like, at least you know what it's going to be like, but even then you're not going to be able to prepare yourself for that.
100%. And that's why I ask it, is because how the hell would you ever be able to prepare for something like that without doing it? I don't know. I don't know that you can, until maybe after you've done it. Which brings me to just also two psychological terms that you said, the mental luxuries. It's exactly what they are. I don't know if you're familiar with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
No.
So it's like the basic needs are at the bottom, like the basic fundamental safety needs, like the things that you're talking about that you were craving and that provide you that safety. Those are the things like in modern society that we really don't have to think about whatsoever. And at the top of the pyramid, it's something called self-actualization, which is just you becoming your best self essentially, and like hitting your highest potential. So when you're in a society, like you have the luxury of having those needs taken care of, so you can actually hit the top of the pyramid. But when you're doing a challenge like this, you got to go backtrack down to the bottom, back to the basic needs. And that's exactly what you did. So it's just something I wanted to bring up as well. And it kind of segues really well into the next question, which is, if you were to do it again, would you do anything different or anything the same?
I wouldn't carry as much equipment. I'd buy more expensive, more reliable equipment. I would probably end up using a different kind of bike, something a little more rugged and something a little more utilitarian and cheap, just because part availability in these foreign countries is hard to come by. All the components on it are very hard to come by in these foreign countries. The wheels are very lightweight. They're not really meant to take a beating. But I had no idea what I was in for with this gravel. Like, I had no idea how bad the terrain was going to be, and it took me by surprise for sure. So I think it would be a different bike, spend a little more money on the equipment, and overall try to go as lightweight as possible and as minimalistic as possible, especially for a speed run like this. So
Nice.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And the fact that you said 65% gravel is like, when you hit road, you must have been feeling so good.
yeah, so the first 800 miles were on the Carretera Austral. 85% of that was gravel.
When you say the first 800 miles,
Yeah.
you realize, like, I don't know, you realize the gravity of that, right?
Yeah. The first 800 miles, it was 85% gravel, 5% single track, and like 10% paved. And then around 65,000 feet of the elevation was within those 800 miles. So the rest of the trip was really the desert, the flats, pavement, some gravel, but not much, and wind. That was like the second chapter of the book, right? The first chapter was climbing these insane 14% grades for miles on end. But the wind wasn't bad, right? So you take you take something good, and then you get the shit for the next chapter, right? But yeah.
So
Yeah, you just traded elevation for wins.
Mhm.
Yeah, dude, 800 miles with 85% gravel is just, yeah, hard to even conceptualize how someone just stays present and like is able to conquer that. The training background is definitely explains a lot, and makes a lot of sense as to how you're able to like seamlessly complete this challenge. So good on you for that, man. And I would say I have like just a bunch of questions I could just keep firing if that's cool.
Yep.
Let's do it. How about active recovery strategies along the way? Was there ever anything you were doing to kind of just rest and recover along the way?
I was really bad about that. I didn't do much, man. At the end of the day, I think I was just so mentally gone that I was just worried about getting food in me and then just cleaning myself off, because at first I was starting to get some gnarly infections, and I was like, okay, no, wait. So like, I was really worried about just getting to my final destination, pitching tent or finding a place to stay, eating and sleeping and drinking water, and that was really it. I wasn't worried about stretching. I wasn't worried about doing this or that. And, I got injuries because of it. My knee started to hurt after 3 days, and that knee pain continued on for a week and a half into the trip. Eventually it went away. So that's something I could probably work on for the next time.
I mean, I get it though. Like as we were saying before, you're on the lower part of the pyramid of the needs, right? Like stretching is not as important as it normally would be, right? Like you got stuff to do and you got to keep your mind just focused on the next thing. So that makes a lot of sense to me. That's all good. You still got it done. How would you describe like your relationship with yourself along the ways?
I'll be honest, there was a lot of hatred. There was a lot of pity. There were moments of happiness. There were moments of pride. Wherever my mind was wandering was essentially how I felt of myself. Over time, it got better. And I think it was more so because I was thinking through these things that were going on in my head. Life decisions and life choices and trials and errors from the ages of 18 to now as a young adult. I think over the course of the trip, I finally was able to think about these things. In our Western society, we're always doing something, so we tend to block all of these thoughts off. The way I felt of myself essentially transitioned from a lot of hatred and pity and sadness to more understanding and acceptance and pride over the course of the trip.
You have so much time on this type of expedition. Like how long was it in total?
I was on the bike for 23 days.
Yeah, bro. That's like 24 hours, maybe I don't know how much you were sleeping, but you can call it like 16 to 18 hours a day of just being on.
I was on the saddle on average. I think I look back, it was 60 to 70 hours a week. I was on the saddle, which amounts to around 10 hours a day, yeah, on average. So
10 on average, but sometimes up to 14.
Yeah, honestly, it could be more. It could be more. Yeah.
Cool. So we could say 10 to 16 range roughly each day. So this is a cool one because I was watching your videos the whole time. What actions, like specific actions, did you take to overcome some of the mental endurance obstacles that you had mentioned throughout your videos?
I think a lot of men are guilty of this, and I don't think it's a great way to go about it. Similar to how I had all these issues as a young adult, and they come up now, right, because you have all this time to think about it. I've always been used to just blocking out the stress. Like, it could be the worst situation on planet Earth, but I look at it and I'm just able to turn it off, and I'm just able to look at it analytically and just be like, okay. And it worked on the bike. But as soon as you get to a point where you stop everything, and let's say you're setting up a tent or you're just sitting in bed, that all comes back to haunt you. Some of the stuff kept me up at night. Towards the end of the trip, I just started kind of talking to myself. When I would get really pissed off, I would just scream at the top of my lungs because there's no one around me. There wasn't anything shielding me from it. It was just all too real to warp it into something that wasn't reality to try to make me feel better because it was just so in your face. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of the gist, right?
It absolutely did. Yeah. You look at it analytically, you were able to block it out. And are you able to expand on like how you block it out? Is it like, I have some athletes that'll like swipe it to the side. I have some athletes that'll completely like just imagine their mind just going like completely white, or they'll just like distract themselves with like a physical cue. Is there anything that you did specifically to tune it out, or you kind of just like replace the thought?
Just forget about it. And it's just something that you develop as a younger guy, I guess, if you go through some things and you have to for survival to actually function in society. You kind of just have to block out these things. It's not something you can necessarily train for. I think it's just something that you learn how to do when you live day by day through something difficult. I think I just applied it again in this situation and it worked, but it's not something I want to continue doing, right? Because I don't want to continue just treating some situations as if they're not tragic or a problem, right? I want to be empathetic and understanding of others. So it's yeah, it's yeah.
Well, it is an effective strategy as well, in the same breath too, right?
Yeah.
Um, so like I say that to say that it's not necessarily maladaptive. I would argue it's adaptive, and the way that everyone does it, like you said, is different based on their life experience and what formed them. So that was a coping strategy that worked, in my opinion, and I'm sure in yours too, based on what you're saying. That kind of segues pretty well into the next question I have for you, which was, what was the biggest challenge for you?
The war of emotions in my head. It had nothing to do with the physicality of the entire trip. It was the war of emotions in my head. All of the thoughts running through it, trying to find and come up with the answers, and going from a place of viewing it from my perspective and trying to view things from other people's perspective. Trying to look at all these, at all my thoughts and trying my best to kind of come up with an answer. Doing that and not being able to hide away from it was probably the most difficult thing from this trip. It wasn't the lack of food. It wasn't the fear of running out of water. It was that, for sure. Because that ultimately was bringing me more to the fence of not being able to complete this than not having water or food. I still had body fat on me, I still had water in my system. I felt tired. My mind was getting to the point where I felt like I was breaking every day. You come to this place and, where you're going to sleep, and you're just so mentally exhausted. It takes 2 hours to sit down and fully kind of come back to your senses, just from how much you're thinking and how the pain you're enduring and how you're just pushing that to the side. It just comes back. You can't hide away from it.
How did you respond to those emotions? How did you work with them in that moment?
It's almost like you having your hands tied behind your back. You're sitting in a chair. Your hands and your feet are tied to the chair. You got someone holding your eyes open and you're in front of a TV screen. That's what it is for 12 hours a day on the bike. There's no hiding from it. There's no other way to cope with it other than thinking through it. I can get distracted by a sheep for 4 minutes. As soon as that's old, it's just back to, your thoughts.
From what you said, you work through it analytically, right? You look at it rationally. You work through that. You let certain things go, right? As you had said.
The physical issues, I looked at very analytically. As for the emotional, the thoughts, those issues, I tried to come from more of a sympathetic, emotional way of looking at it rather than looking at it analytically, because I think that was the reason why I was having issues with these thoughts to begin with. I tried to look at it all with a little more compassion. I tried to look at these things with a different perspective. Those weren't very analytical. Those were definitely coming deep down from the inner soul, from the heart. The way it should be looked at, I believe, some of these things. So
Yeah, dude, 100%. If you're talking about the physical stuff, like you can make sense of it all, right? Like you have a lot of physical training experience and stuff. But the key that you said was that you looked at it with sympathy, but you said you used compassion. And that is like one of the biggest mental skills that I work alongside athletes on, because everyone is super critical naturally. It's kind of the negativity bias that the brain has built in. And it's just what the brain does. It's what it does. It loves to be negative. It loves to self-reference and make it like negative towards self. So the fact that you were able to recognize it in the moment and kind of replace that critique with compassion and work through those thoughts and like move through them, rather than, sometimes it's definitely helpful to push them to the side. But as you said, they might revolve around back to you, right? It's a 10 to 15 hours a day on a bike. So they might float away for a moment, but of course they're going to come back, whether it's on the bike or in the tent or what have you. So the fact that you were able to insert compassion mindfully there is just a super high level skill that deserves attention. It's not easy either. I know how that skill works. I don't know how it works in this context, of course, but that skill is definitely a hard one to train. And it's like you're working against how your brain's programmed, essentially. But kudos to you for that, man.
yeah, you really have to put like your ego aside. I feel like it's part of it.
It's a huge part of it. Huge part of it. This one's a really interesting one that I really like to ask all my athletes as well is that energy, the drive that got you to accomplish this feat? Is there anywhere else in your life that you feel it?
So I didn't go to college. I've been working in construction since I was 18. Within 2 years, I managed to create a smaller building company. You really have to be pretty much dialed in 24/7. I know your father is in the business too. It's a lot of organization. It's a lot of paperwork. The people we work for out here, they expect nothing but the best. With that, comes a great source of income, but you kind of have to treat it with a relentless drive to do everything in the best way possible. So I would just say work. General contracting is a lot of the same things apply, although I really try to separate my work life from my life outside of that. I used to, but I'm not going to work 80 hours a week, 70 hours a week. I work my hours and I do my best within those hours, and that's it. But the same thought process and mindset, I'd say, would be applied to that.
Yeah, and the grit's there. A lot of the same skills are there, I'm sure. I just know based on my dad's experience, but like you send an estimate and you just get like no response sometimes. How you can work with your mind in that moment and be a little bit compassionate toward that could be helpful as well. So many things that you had described, like what's your relationship with yourself, but also as yourself as a professional, as an athlete, as a human. All these things that definitely cross over. And I definitely could see how like construction and GC has some overlap as well. Three more kind of brief questions and take them however you want to take them. But how has life been since accomplishing this feat?
I completed this trip on the 23rd, technically, but I was stuck in Chile up until the 27th. So, as you know, December 24th, 25th, those are pretty big days. You got Christmas Eve, you got Christmas Day, and essentially everyone's off that week enjoying their time with their family. And call me crazy, I chose to leave and to do this trip during that period to see how I would react and to see how I could cope with not having family or friends near me. When I finished on the 23rd, I was absolutely destroyed. The previous day, I almost became hypothermic. I made it to this statue that in my head, I thought was like made out of gold. I thought it was like the next best thing. And I showed up, a couple guys there smoking cigarettes. It was gray and dark out. It was cloudy. It was cold. And it was kind of like rainy. Parked my bike. When it was all over, I really almost fell into a depression, kind of realizing that I achieved it, but now I just have to, continue on. I have to go find a place to go sleep again. I have to go do this. I have to go do that. And there's no one there to celebrate with me. That up until right around Christmas Day, Christmas Eve. And I met this guy named Bruce 5 days prior to making it to the final destination. Him and I bonded a lot. He's 70 years old. He was a writer from LSU, probably the complete opposite of who I am as a person, but we managed to bond and create this beautiful relationship. And I had to say bye to him a couple days prior to me finishing up. And he messaged me and he's like, "Hey, Bayron, I want to spend Christmas with you while you're out in Punta Arenas. So I'm going to buy a bus ticket and I'm going to come out. We're going to stay in the same hostel and just hang out together." That was really what I needed. It was a big moment of happiness that I had, but I was still battling with this depression of kind of being done with everything, just feeling lost, still thinking about everything that I've thought of, but coming to grips with my conclusions and all those things. On the 28th, when I did get back home, my friend Lauren Neal picked me up. From the moment I opened that car door to go into her car, I just had the biggest smile on my face. And then from that point on, I was a lot happier. I felt 10 times better than how I felt before I started the trip. Now it's all kind of back to normal. It was a weird mix of emotions coming back, but it's weird, right? Because I finished, but it's not like I went back home immediately. So I was stuck out there still. around everything that I've had to fight, still battling the same things. Now I had nothing to do. Everything's closed Christmas Day, everything's closed Christmas Eve, the days after. Now you're really just stuck with your thoughts. You're not busy working on your bike. You've come to the finish line and there's nothing for you. I'm sorry if that's all over the place. It's a little hard to kind of explain what was going on in my head, but it was a mess of emotions for sure at the end. I'd say worse than when I was on the bike. And then finally coming back home, it all cleared up. I was able to find peace.
I was imagining just like a chart, like a graph of like the first day, or like the first day upon completion. And you had mentioned the depression, so I just imagine like a point going low, and then as you're speaking, it stayed low, but then it really, really exponentially rose up, and that's when you got in the car, right? And then from there, it feels like it's just like a slope that's just getting you back.
Oh man, it was pretty rough. Like, yeah, dude, I'm gonna be honest, I'm ashamed of it. Christmas Day, you know, Bruce is an old guy. He went to sleep early. I don't blame him. We got dinner and everything, but it was high, like serotonin just skyrocketing, going down when I'm left to my own devices, right? You have nothing to do. Everyone's celebrating with their families. You know, you don't want to reach out. It was funny looking back at it now. I'm like, wow, I was really upset. That night I actually went to church. There was a midnight mass. You know, I kind of found a little more peace, and then I eventually, those days leading up, I went back to the church. I just kind of stayed there for a little bit and kind of meditated, and that's the brutal honesty. You know, I'm not gonna lie to you. We can all be fun, cool athletes who are super healthy, but there's still bad. You know, we all do, and it's just part of life, right?
Yeah, dude. Thanks for keeping it honest. That's what we want always, and just generally. But yeah, so like kind of to more accurately describe it, it was just like a graph going up and down like this. And you had 4 freaking nights, right? Didn't you have 4 nights?
4 nights stuck there. Yep.
Yeah, dude, that's a lot of time when you've already done what you've set to do. And like at that point, you might be feeling homesick. I don't want to assume that, but like, especially during these times, like during Christmas, there's a lot of emotions that come with it. And I wouldn't call you crazy at all. I would have huge respect for adding a layer to the challenge, which was doing it at a time that would be just difficult because of what you're used to in life. Like you're used to spending that time with family and like a secure environment that you're familiar with. So there's a lot of variables there, but I think that's awesome to add another layer to the challenge. I think that's just a big marker for just like someone who's just ferociously driven to challenge themselves, which I would say is you. Absolutely.
Appreciate it, man.
What is one thing that you want to take from this challenge moving forward?
Really redefining my own self-confidence and resilience. You know, I had a definition of what that meant to me before I started. Now it's on a completely different level. It's not something that I'm ever going to really think about specifically, but I think it'll just be applied automatically to my life day to day. So I think that's probably the biggest thing I'll be taking away from this trip.
Cool. Awesome, man. I'm excited to see what's next, and that's kind of my next question. Without adding any pressure, you just got back, dude. I don't want to make you start thinking about anything. And this definitely doesn't have to be in athletics. But what's next for you generally?
So I got a few that I'm kind of juggling around right now, but ultimately it depends on what time of the year I'll be able to do these. So this would be right around the same time next year. Choice number 1 would be climbing Aconcagua in South America. So that's the tallest mountain out there. I have no climbing experience, but I want to do it. And it's not a very technical mountain, but it's more of a slugfest. It's still below 8,000 meters. Nothing too crazy, but I would love to do that. I was also thinking about bike packing South Africa. My last choice would be doing a time trial of the Icelandic Ring Road. So that's the 800-mile road that wraps around Iceland. I would love to go out there with a buddy and do a supported time trial, you know, on the bike for 3 days, 4 days straight, and then try to see how fast I can manage to cover, you know, the distance in total. That's what I would like to do next year. We'll see. Financially, the climbing on Aconcagua is probably a little tight on the budget, you know, but the others seem like pretty feasible. So that's what I've been thinking, man.
That's cool, man. One of them is like, well, they're actually both very different. You know, the time trial is a completely different story, as well as the climbing. Like those are like, in my eyes, completely different. In your eyes, they might be a little bit more similar. I'm not too sure. When you're fighting the clock versus you're fighting the elements and like a point to point, it's like such a different mentality. So either way that you go, I feel like it'll grow out your mental toolbox even further and grow out your resiliency and your source of confidence even more. So that's exciting, bro. I definitely will be following that as well. And it was a joy to follow this one too, man. I appreciate you sharing the experience. Everyone that I was in touch with was enjoying it very much. So thank you for that, dude.
Yeah, no problem, man. Glad. It's nice to hear.
Yeah, dude, it was. Yeah, I mean, I'm not like people, you have no idea who they are. And maybe you know them actually because we're from a similar area, but even people in Colorado here, because I have a lot of like fellow sports psychs that I like. I'm like, yo, check out this guy. Like, what questions would you want to ask him? And then like I kind of pool them all together and like figure out which ones really make sense and which ones I want to dive into. But yeah, dude, you had like more support networks than you knew.
Oh, it's nice.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, and it was just fun to watch. You displayed it very well, and we can definitely collaborate, or I'm happy to give you creative control over this interview as well. So you can just sit on that and let me know. Either way, I'm happy to collaborate and or create. So you just let me know what you're thinking.
Cool. Yeah, man. Absolutely.